37, and 38. We're not going to get to 39. It's short anyway. But we're actually going to look at a good portions of these chapters. I have the luxury that the previous four SAPs, the teachers for this, had many chapters to cover. And I have a historical narrative, which is just not fair. It's small. We were just at one point in time, and so I have this massive advantage, and I'm going to take advantage of it tonight. But I want to give a quick overview. I am really old, and so what's like reading for you just doesn't necessarily work for me. So I have PowerPoint slides. Could someone get them to actually show on the screen for me? I think we have the technology, but we're...
I have the technology.
Yes, we know the office. See how it goes? Brandon's going to get me squared away. Okay, so anyone know what the name Isaiah means? Salvation. Salvation of Yahweh. That's what Isaiah means. And so, appropriately named prophet, Isaiah is one of the so-called major prophets. Do you ever know why they're called major prophets? What distinguishes them from the minor prophets in the Old Testament? They're just longer. Right. So all these prophets are important. When we get the first slide up here, what we're going to see is a divided kingdom. Israel's been divided into a northern and southern kingdom. And we're going to see prophets attached to a couple 100-year time frame. And hopefully they'll come up because these slides will help us. Thus far, in the last number of chapters, there have been endless oracles. And oracles are basically delivered through the prophet Isaiah, messages to the people in real time, messages directed to people with real spiritual needs and certain spiritual conditions. And they feel endless in Isaiah. If you have been trying to read through Isaiah and you've just had oracle overload, or you're just like mind-numbing after a while, as the Lord addresses different people groups, including his own people, but then nations around, that's normal and that's okay. I struggle sometimes to get through oracle after oracle after oracle. And what you'll see sometimes too, are we rebooting? Thank you. Is there hope?
It was frozen.
I taxed the laptop, so that's the problem. What we will see as we're wrapping up, I highly recommend, by the way, if you're serious at all about understanding Isaiah, you have to watch Nick's first episode. It's on YouTube. But there's basically three significant, distinct chapters, segments of Isaiah, right? And we're wrapping up number one tonight. And number one, the first 39 chapters of Isaiah, actually has Isaiah as a live, active participant. He is the one referring to himself at times. We see his commissioning. We see him speaking to the people. We see him dead center in this story that we're about to read together, as he is delivering God's word of encouragement to King Hezekiah. Anyone know anything about King Hezekiah? He is like serious thumbs up. We're in hundreds of years of kings giving leadership to God's people. Northern Kingdom did not fare so well under the kings. In fact, they met their end, as we'll see on the chart here. Assyria destroys them and they're dispersed. 10 tribes were dispersed to the wind. We're looking at the southern kingdom in our story tonight. Judah and Hezekiah comes along, and he's described. What's helpful here, 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles are giving us a historical blow by blow. And so when we read, and we actually have here's a story within Isaiah in this prophetic book, we can compare notes with these other historical records, and they fill in some blanks for us. They give us some more detail. Now, what we learn from those other books is that Hezekiah, the Jews, his legacy, the take on Hezekiah was that he was the best ever in Judah. that he walked with the Lord like none other in this line of kings. And so as we're eventually get to the story, a couple things I want you to look for. One is, what does it look like to give good spiritual leadership in crisis? Okay? One of the things that we really try to be in ACFA is talk about leadership a lot. What does it mean to be a person giving strong leadership in our worlds, whether it be within a church setting, a faith community, or outside of it? And I want you to look for characteristics of Hezekiah. There's quite a few of them that will show up even in the short narrative where you're like, impressive. And so in the end, well, it'll be juxtaposed to King Sennacherib. I'm not going to try to do the proper Hebrew pronunciation. Any Hebrew people here that can actually pronounce that correctly? I'm just going with the sad English attempt. So this king, a good king to compare to Hezekiah, actually, and hopefully we'll get to, wow, still struggling. Semi-frozen screen. This is not Brandon's fault. I don't know what you're saying. I had trouble last night too, and it was not a good sign.
Yeah, you got it online, but
I'm optimistic that I'll at least be able to read it off of there. Because I want to read a couple of stories. Let's see.
Brandon, do you want to miss the stick?
it's not booting up.
Yeah. So we should pray. We were talking about prayer last night. We should pray for the little laptop. That it will. All right. Here's what we learned in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles about Hezekiah. Hezekiah, the moment he became king, in his first year, at age 25, following a very poor example. Who's his father? Ahaz, yeah. Horrible example. Somehow Hezekiah lands well, coming from that household and that example. And from the moment he begins to reign, reforms start to come under his leadership. One of the major reforms that Hezekiah accomplished, that he took on, was to tear down the high places. That's a phrase that you see over 100 times in the scriptures, in the Old Testament. Anyone have any idea what the high places represented, what they meant in the land of Canaan? That this is connected to Canaanite worship. What was a high place? Anyone know?
Just like a place where the gods reside?
Yes, and therefore then a place of worship. Often there would be a nice view under a luxurious tree or whatever, and they would set up something of an altar. And people would worship there the many gods of, and some count, and I'm actually going to give you all a piece of 6 gods. Pick one. Now, this is not just I'm going to go up there for a picnic, have a nice time. In some of those many kind of little worship areas and shrines, there was child sacrifice, there was just some serious things that went on there. This was no small thing. And guess what the people of God struggled with for many centuries, even in spite of the prophet's warnings over and over again? The people of God would also at times go up and worship in these high places, in these mountains, and they would worship other gods. This really set God off, upset with this, rival gods truly, and here Hezekiah's first move, tear those things down. And no one up to that point in time had had the courage to go after it like Hezekiah went after it. Tore them down. Why did he do that? Because he wanted people to return to the Lord. His heart was in the right place apparently as he as these reforms unfolded. Now, wow, this doesn't look good. Does not bode well. And they were helpful too. What's really fun about this part of history is that we archaeologists have made some amazing discoveries. 150 years ago, they discovered something called the Prism of Zerach. which was basically a recounting his exploits, including his attack on the people of God, surrounding Jerusalem in our story, and Hezekiah is mentioned there. Amazing stuff. And he thinks he did not have a self-esteem problem, let's say. He did not struggle, and he was, and really operated in a godlike manner. Is the king that's set and opposed to King Hezekiah. So that's our main players, King Hezekiah and King Zerah. Wow, I don't have the name memorized. Now, Sennacherib, thank you. Now, he sent a representative, an emissary, named Rabshakeh, so when you see the name Rabshakeh everywhere through this, it's just the king. He's speaking for the king. He's filled with the same arrogance that his king is filled with. And so that's what we'll see. So let's get into the narrative, and hopefully we'll be able to dial into some of Zedekiah's sayings and a couple of visuals. But let's turn to Isaiah 36. And I'm going to read a portion, make some comments, and try to spin through the story relatively quickly and try to set us up again to talk about a couple of things. All right, so in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, so he was 39 years old, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. Now, Lachish is about 30 miles from Jerusalem. It was the last kind of major, significant fortified city before Jerusalem itself. And we're talking about the king of Assyria brags of, how many? 46, I think, fortified cities, significant cities that he just took over. So the people of God, in trying to understand what condition they're in, what they're thinking about in these days as they're holed up in Jerusalem, is what? They've got to be terrified. The Assyrian threat has been kind of steadily mounting and growing over time, but think about it. Everything has been lost except for this little remnant, the numbers, but this remnant holed up in Jerusalem, which was a well-walled city. One of the finds just 30, 40 years ago was actually the wall of Jerusalem at this time. They can date it quite precisely. And the visual will show you like a 15-foot wide wall, the remnants of this massive wall. Now, why in the world would they put that kind of wall up around Jerusalem at the time? Because there was a very, very real threat constantly. So it's tough for most of us to imagine, not all of us, what it would be like to live in that kind of condition where there's always this threat that's not that far away. And in this season, in this moment, the people have to be absolutely terrified. The threats that we'll see here, the Rabshakeh can back all of this up. I mean, there's just an army waiting. The king didn't even bother to come along for this last part of the campaign. I think because it's like this is just a win. It was that grim. It was that kind of like this might be the end of us. And so picking up, he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway of the Washer's Field. Does that look familiar? That same place shows up in chapter 7 when Isaiah met King Asa, and there was an encounter there that didn't go so well. Same location. It's obviously a key meeting place. That's where they meet. And the Rabshakeh said to them, say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, on what do you rest this trust of yours? Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? In whom do you now trust, that you have rebelled against me? Behold, you are trusting in Egypt, that broken reed of a staff, which will pierce the hand of a man who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. Now there's a string, there's three kind of taunts here. This is not negotiation, or this is not, would you agree to do this? This is threat. And the reason it's threat is this. in the Chronicles and in 2 Kings, we see that Hezekiah didn't play ball in the years prior to this. We see that Hezekiah resisted kissing the ring of the who was the Assyrian king, kind of had power over that area. This is kind of like a vassal state a little bit. They had to pay, to just kind of, and the king, and one of the things that we'd see in the king's own edict is that if other kings kind of went along and submitted to his lordship, then he'd probably treat them okay, and they would be servants in the land, and they would not be destroyed. But if anyone resisted his will, did not submit to his lordship, they would be destroyed. In fact, there's a wall, carvings, a visual, where it shows kings and leaders impaled and along walls and ramparts in this campaign that the king waged leading up to this last encounter in Jerusalem. So the reason that, and here's the other thing that we see in the other letters, filling in the blanks, is that King Hezekiah, concerned not only for his own faith, but for the faith of the people in Jerusalem, tried to work a deal out where he said, here's a bunch of silver and gold, it's yours. Tried to, just give the spoils, the riches to the king to try to assuage him, or just to try to say, I know you don't like me and you're after us, but here's it. So the king, one of the leadership, had made an attempt, without compromising, I believe, his faith, had made an attempt to slow down or to soften the blow, but that was rejected apparently because it was full steam ahead for the king of Assyria. 3, you trust in Pharaoh. That's some reference, we don't have much detail there, that the king Hezekiah perhaps had also tried to work out some kind of alliance with Egypt. We don't know much there. There's a charge. Then there's a charge, verse 7, but you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God. Is it not he whose high places that Hezekiah has removed? The simple logic there is, the more altars, the better. Hezekiah took a bunch of them down. What's wrong with this with him? Why would you trust Hezekiah? And so the emissaries' charges are really directed at whom here? Primarily at Hezekiah, trying to undermine the people who are listening to the wall and watching all of this, trying to get them to just say, turn on Hezekiah. But who else is the emissary and the king of Syria confronting? Not just Hezekiah. Who's right behind Hezekiah? Human. Isaiah, right? We're going to see Isaiah show up here. Isaiah is speaking for the Lord. And then who's behind Isaiah, of course? Yahweh. The Lord is actually. So these charges, even though the people of God are looking to Hezekiah big time right now. They're looking to their leader for, for the cue. There's really 3 people here that are charged with being brought in this. Come now, make a wager with my master, the king of Assyria. Verse 8. I will give you 2,000 horses. Skip to 10. Moreover, it is without the Lord that I have come up to this land to destroy it. The Lord said to me, go up to this land and destroy it. So kind of these random, trying to undermine people's faith in Hezekiah, saying, the Lord actually sent me. You guys are doomed. Then the threesome that were representing Hezekiah said, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand. Do not speak to us in the language of Judah, within the hearing of the people on the wall. Why? Because they were concerned that the people would hear what was being said. But the Rabshakeh said, has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the men sitting on the wall, who are doomed with you to eat their own dung and drink their own urine. Then the Rabshakeh stood and called out a loud voice in the language of Judah, hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. The city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come out to me. Then each one of you will eat his own vine and each one his own fig tree and drink the water of his own cistern. there's kind of like a promise of almost a promised land here. Come along with us, be agreeable, don't follow Hezekiah's advice here, and the way will go well with you. Now, was that true? Probably not. Maybe not. The people might have been destroyed anyway. They open up the gates of the city. It's all bets are off. But the promise, and I think that there's deceiving words in there. The only true words, for sure, for real, in this whole discourse, are when it says that Hezekiah has defied the king of Assyria and trusts God. That's about the only time that we can be completely confident that this emissary is speaking the truth. So look for the deception kind of woven in there. Now, when Hezekiah turned this, he tore his clothes and sackcloth. This was what the folks in the Old Testament era would do when they were in deep trouble, and they would humble themselves before the Lord by ripping off their clothes, their robes, and covering themselves with dust and crying out to the Lord. Next right move by Hezekiah is to fall on his face and to, in a sense, lead everyone else to do the same. And they went to Isaiah. Now, Isaiah was quite old at this time, and so this is a trusted voice, certainly by Hezekiah, probably by many people. Isaiah is interesting because we learn very little about his person. We just see him delivering oracle after oracle, but we really don't learn much about Isaiah. But I'm guessing that they trusted Isaiah a great deal, and we'll see the result of that, I think, here. All right, thus says Hezekiah, verse 3, chapter 37, this day is a day of distress, of rebuke, and of disgrace. Children have come to the point of birth, and there is no strength to bring them forth. It may be that the Lord your God will hear the words of Rabshakeh, whom his master, the king of Assyria, sent to mock the living God, and will rebuke the words that the Lord your God has heard. Therefore lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. When the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, say to your master, thus says the Lord, do not be afraid because of the words that you have heard, with which the young men of the king of Assyria have reviled me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, so that he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land. That's what happened. And I will make him fall by the sword of his own land. That sounds like, wow, that happened fast. If the prophecy is true, it actually happened 20 years later. King Sennacherib's own son assassinated him about 20 years later. And the king also retreated at the end of this, and Jerusalem was spared for the moment. The Rabshakeh returned, found the king of Assyria fighting against Libnah, distracted. Now the king heard, verse 9, concerning the, let me see. Verse 10, thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Do not let your God, in whom you trust, deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given in the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard that what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands, devoting them to destruction. And shall you be delivered? And the gods of the nations delivered them, the gods that my fathers destroyed, etc., and list them all off. Now here's his prayer, verse 15. There's two buckets, two little groups that I want us to talk about in a few minutes. One is prayer in general. Here we're going to see a prayer of faith, and I want to highlight something. Verse 15. Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone of all the kings of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. And hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the king of Assyria, have laid waste all the nations in their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. So now, O Lord our God, save us from his hand. Why? Why should the Lord do this? That all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are God. Now think about it. The news of this turning away that happens by the hand of the Lord spread throughout that region at that time. But think about it. We're looking at this story today, and that news has gone throughout the sense that you're 21. Then Isaiah the son of Amos sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because you have prayed to me concerning Zechariah, king of Assyria, this is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. She despises you, she scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. She wags her head behind you, the daughter of Jerusalem. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes to the heights? Against the Holy One of Israel. By your servants you have mocked the Lord, and you have said, With my many chariots I have gone up to the heights of the mountains, to the far recesses of Lebanon, to cut down its tallest cedars, etc. Verse 35, I'm just skipping for time's sake, though this is the word of the Lord, it's hard to skip over all that. Verse 35, For I will defend the city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. Another way of saying, sake of my people. 36, And the angel of the Lord went out. There's so little detail given us here. And struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. And then there's a prophecy. And as he's worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, his sons struck him down with a sword, and after they escaped in the land of Erat, etc., the son took his place. End of that story. Now here's the thing to keep in mind. Did that defeat of the Assyrians, and it's interesting that not much detail is given there, but apparently an angel of the Lord, angels of death, and we see that in the scriptures here and there. Think of Egypt in the night where the firstborn were struck down. Apparently an angel, warring angels of the Lord, took out the army, and the folks in Jerusalem didn't have to defend themselves. Other times, as this little nation is surviving, carrying this plan of redemption with them through the centuries, the likes of King David and all were warriors and actually fought in those battles. But it's, in this case, angel of the Lord wipes out this army. A stunning response to Hezekiah's prayer. Hezekiah has one more prayer I want to just look at really quickly in chapter 28. Hezekiah became sick and learned that he would die. The Lord told him that, you will die. Isaiah said, Thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die, you shall not recover. Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord and said, Please, O Lord, remember, look at where Hezekiah goes here. Remember how I have walked before you in faithfulness and with a whole heart, and have done what is good in your sight. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. Now, I think it's in 2 Kings, there's a little statement woven in talking about Hezekiah where it says that at some point, maybe with some spiritual victories under his belt, he had some spiritual pride that he had to deal with. So we're not talking about a king that was perfect, by no means whatsoever. This is a king, a man who struggled in the same ways that we struggled, right? But the trajectory of his life was one of faithfulness to the Lord, and Hezekiah is dialing in on that and reminding the Lord of that as he makes another bold request, which is, Lord, I don't want to die yet. I'd rather stick around for a while. Verse 4, then the word of the Lord came to Isaiah, Go and say to Hezekiah, Thus says the Lord, the God of David your father, I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears. Behold, I will add 15 years to your life. I will deliver you and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria, and will defend this city. This shall be the sign to you from the Lord, that the Lord will do this thing that he has promised. Behold, I will make the shadow cast, etc. Now, what happens next in 38, I won't read it, is a psalm of Hezekiah. Hezekiah rejoices in this very good news, this answer to prayer, as he had hoped for, and there's this psalm of praise to Yahweh there. And that ends chapter 38. Now here's what I want to try to set up, even though first of all, I think we have like a minute and a half of this. Any glaring kinds of questions or things that are just like, anyone have a question or comment or troubled by?
Sorry. So what
last week we learned that Isaiah was talking about how the people of God were looking to Egypt for help.
Yes.
I'm just a little bit confused as to how Hezekiah is received so joyfully when he, like, it's also like a little statement about him also looking to Egypt for help.
Yeah, apparently it wasn't a looking for help or putting his trust in them in the kind of degree that he really was in an ultimate sense. When push came to shove, when the fire of the most serious kind of trial, facing his own death really at the hand of the Assyrians, when that moment arose, what did Hezekiah do? He proved that his trust was in Yahweh by not trying to work out a deal with the Assyrians. That would have been a very natural, normal thing for human beings to do facing their own death, right? Responsible for a bunch of people as well. Think of the responsibility you felt for the people. It's like, am I going to put myself, kind of out on a limb here and not try to negotiate with our executors, to look for, because he'd already tried that, right, in a small way. But I think what he saw is he saw blasphemy in the charges against not just him, not Isaiah, but against the Lord. And that's where he said, that's too far. And he said, filling in the blanks, if we die, we die, but he would not surrender himself, as he had not in the years before, would not submit to the king of Assyria. He would not do that. So when it comes to, maybe I'll play off with that a little bit, I think there's two things, and for those of you, that's something in small groups, I have little handouts for you to just track along with some questions, so you're not on your own here. But I want you to visit two places in the next half hour plus or so. One is on prayer, and a couple of questions. One would, I think there are moments in life when our prayer life is kind of revealed, or there's just like, oh, who am I trusting in? Where is my allegiance? John used that language last week. Where does my trust really lie? And the places that happens, one is in crisis. That's always a test. Where, and fortunately, many of us have almost a reflex, an instinct of just like crying out to God in those moments and trying to trust Him. I think the other places our prayer lives are kind of tested in terms of how we'll respond is in temptation. Here's the thing I want to tether in with Hezekiah's saying, look at my faithful track record, imperfect, faithful track record, answer my prayer. The question I want you guys to wrestle with is, one, how's my prayer life? Am I praying at all these days? And why, if not, why not? And if I am, what am I leveraging in my thinking? And here's what I'm trying to say. Hezekiah believed that his prayers were being heard. It was conditional. What was the condition? That he was walking with the Lord. So the question that I want you guys to think about, wrestle with, maybe you haven't thought about it before, maybe you have, is are effectual prayers conditional? Are they conditional? For anyone crawling out and crying out to God, how much does our own personal righteousness or holiness inform whether those prayers will be heard by the Lord? Of course, He hears every prayer, but heard as in gain response, gain His favor. And I've added a couple of passages that I want you I think I'll have time to look at these briefly, that suggests that the biblical record says, New Testament passages mostly, that is the case. First of all, earlier in Isaiah, if you remember, if it's chapter 1 or 2, you might recall where God says, I'm tired of your festivals and the rituals, and why? Because there's blood on their hands. There's a way of saying they were not walking with God, they were walking in sin, blood on their hands, therefore I will not hear your prayers. That's earlier in Isaiah. I think we see some passages in the New Testament that suggest the same. So I want you guys to think on that and to wrestle with that a little bit. talk about prayer. How's our prayer life? There's a couple questions there. The second thing is, I have found that the greatest deterrent to me having an active, vital, real prayer life, real-time prayer life, is what? So you might be able to guess. It's usually because I'm not, this is kind of intuitive for me anyway, I'm not walking that closely with the Lord. I am entertaining some other idols, so to speak, worshiping in some high places. The second bucket that I want you all to think on, look at, is to work off of a couple of questions, and there's a nice, clean, short little article that talks about idols in high places, and asks a couple of kind of personal questions to help us to maybe surface or see some of these things. So I know that might be as confusing as mud to hear that, but hopefully with the outlines that your group facilitators will walk you through, it'll make some sense. So we're going to make two stops. First, we're going to talk amongst each other a little bit. If you're willing to share, we'd love to hear from everybody about the prayer thing, interact with that a little bit. And then secondly, about what does it mean in this day and age, in this era, to worship in high places, to worship competing gods. So that's that felt just blurry and too fast, at least from this benchmark, but that's what we're going to do. Let me just see if we have another minute and a half for another question or two before we yes.
Yeah, on the prayer topic, so something I was a little confused about with Hezekiah's interaction with God is it seems like God's almost testing him by saying like, okay, your life's gonna end, so you should like figure it out with me before that happens. And then he responds by almost like justifying himself with all the like things he's done, rather than like putting himself in humility, being like, you're right, God, it was all you. I'm not doing anything. Like you can take my life if you want, but instead he's kind of saying like, no, I'm valuable. Like keep me around. And I don't really understand why or if that's the right response. And if so, like how does that play into prayer life when it comes to like asking God to remember things we've done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I find it really challenging we're given so little here, just little pieces of a prayer and a response here, a response there, to read what's the motives underneath Hezekiah's request. He was relatively young. I think he was having effective leadership. I'm guessing that the people listening to Hezekiah in that moment of crisis, they didn't answer the Rabshakeh. They refused to answer him because Hezekiah told them not to answer. I don't know what his motives were, but I'm guessing because of the way that Hezekiah is spoken about in the biblical record, that he probably had decent motives in asking for a longer life. I think there's a little bit of mystery in like, well, why is the Lord saying your time on earth is done? To begin with, I have no idea. But in terms of Hezekiah's response, I wouldn't necessarily take that as I'm posturing, like, I should stick around, right? I'm useful and helpful, aren't I? I don't think that was his posture, based on the greater biblical record.
Well, I sort of felt like when he was saying that, he wasn't necessarily talking about like all the good things, really what like all the good things that he had done, but I sort of got the sense that he was saying to God, well, like if you keep me around for a little bit longer, I can make a difference, and I can I can sort of spread your word more, because he was talking about how, he has been influential, and I didn't see it so much as like, keep me around because I'm a cool guy, or justifying why he should be kept alive, but really kind of asking God if he could sort of do God's work by staying alive longer.
That may well be what was underneath it. I agree. I mean, I think, and Hezekiah died, he was 39-ish, and he had seen the Lord's faithfulness for a long time. So he was drawing from kind of a well of some experience there. His faith in the Lord, I think, especially after the Assyrian army was wiped out, was probably pretty high. Like, oh my gosh, the Lord is truly the Lord of all the nations here, even though our lives are being threatened and still are, and that we lost a bunch of people and it's devastating. And it wasn't like, hey, victory, let's throw a parade. It was like, it was still kind of grim times there. But I think his faith and confidence and trust that the Lord was in it all somehow, some way, was still there. And what Hezekiah couldn't fully understand was the Lord was meting out judgment on his people really over time. One of the things that, and you know what I'll do with the summer list, I think you all are on it. I'll send the PowerPoint slide around because I love archaeology. I love the visual, and so there's some really cool slides. And read the king of Assyria's boasts about himself, and you'll see, oh my gosh, for real? I mean, you know, he was really liking himself to be right on par with God, and the God that he trusted, he was close with. But it's like, we rule, and we're great. And even just talks about his benevolence and how amazing he is. And then, you know, and it refers to Hezekiah specifically. But anyway, I think 2 kings to just hold up side by side and go, wow. And I would encourage you to read the greater biblical record on Hezekiah, if you're interested, because he stands out. He really does in this era. Any other questions before we? Okay. So I think we can do this. This can be clean, and hopefully it'll go just swimmingly here. Is break up into groups of 5-ish. So I mean, if it's 4, if it's 6, no problem. But whatever kind of makes sense. Maybe turn it in your places, or if you need to travel a little bit, that's really fine. And if you're willing, once you get in those groups, if you're willing to facilitate conversation, would you please come up and give 2 documents? Sound good? Okay. And I'm just around. If your small group has a question about anything, feel free to just, I'll forward them. Okay?